In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to do the hotel problem. So we have the framing of the hotel right here. We have 18 feet are the beams, 20 feet are the girders. Note these are dimensions over here, not the beams itself. And we are asked to design the interior beam, which would be these beams over here. The exterior beams, the 6 on the outside. The exterior girders, which are these 4 right here, as well as the interior girders right over here. We are given that the dead load is 40 PSF, yield stress steel 36,000 PSI. We are also going to assume that the beams that tie into the columns bypass the girders. So that matters for how it's loading. These beams right here we are saying are tying right to the columns, so what's resting on the girders are actually these 2 beams right here. That'll come into play in a little bit. So the first thing that we are going to do is we're going to look at the interior beam, and we need to figure out how the beam is loaded. And we know that the floor rests on the beam. I'll say that again. The floor is what rests on the beam. So the floor loading is the live load, and that's going to be from this chart over here. We have to go to page 43. And we have our uniform distributed live load. So we have to look for hotels. And hotels says that it's under residential, so go down to residential. QR right here. And we'll just do the top one. I could have probably specified a little bit further, but 40 PSF. And now let's go over to the calculator, and we're going to use uniform distributed load for the beams. And the beam length is 18. And we know that the live load is 40, and the dead load was given at 40. We know that F of Y is 36,000, and you have to include that here before this number will start to populate. E is always going to be 29 million. And we have to get this tributary width. And tributary width seems to trip some students up, but tributary width is pretty simple. It's just the span at which the beam in question is the closest member. So let's see if I have Microsoft Paint on this computer. Tributary width, let's just do a real rudimentary thing right here. And we'll say that this is... Oh, I need that pencil. This is 5 feet. This is 8 feet, and this is 5 feet. Okay, and this is 16 feet. Okay, so I want to get the tributary width of this member. You need to figure out, if I'm standing right here, what's the closest member? Member A or member B? Okay, clearly if I'm right here and you say something above it, member A is the closest member. Same if I'm here, if I'm here, and then if I'm here I'm closer. Then eventually you become closer to member B. What is that cutoff point? It's going to be the halfway point. So the tributary width is going to be halfway between the next closest member, and then if there's no member above or below it, in this case there's something above it, the tributary width is going to be this width across, which is 5 plus half of 8, which is 4. The tributary width for this example is 9. On this example right here, the tributary width for an interior beam is going to be halfway to the member right above it, plus halfway to the member below it. Now, since the beams are evenly spaced, this actually makes it even easier. The tributary width is going to be the beam spacing, which is 6 feet 8 inches. Now, it's not looking for it in 6 feet 8 inches, so you have to do a quick conversion, but 8/12 is 2/3, so this is 6.67 feet. And we have our Z of X value, and now we're ready for the chart. Z of X of 12 is really small. In fact, we're able to use the smallest member they have on the chart, which is a W10 by 12. W10 by 12, and let's look at the Z of X is 12.6, I is 53.8. Good. and then the I is 53.8, and deflection's good. Not by much, but it's good. We have to check shear, even though we know it's not going to fail from shear. So W10 by 12. They have smaller beams under this category, but not under properties. I don't know why. 9.87 and 0.19. 9.87, and then, what did I say? 0.19? Alright, and that's good. So now we are done designing the interior beams. You can take a screenshot of this, pop it into here, as well as answer the other questions. How many are there? You gotta count them up. What member was chosen, etc., etc. Alright, now we're gonna do the exterior. So what's the difference between an interior and the exterior? Well, it's gonna be the same floor loading, right? The only thing that's going to be different is the tributary width. And we should look at this and say, well, the exterior beam has nothing below it where the interiors did. So the exterior beams are actually going to have half, typically, not always, but typically it's going to be half the tributary width of an interior beam. So I'm going to use a lot of the same values. I'm going to just make this 3.33, and it cuts my z of x in half. And this isn't always the case, it just happens to be for this example. You end up choosing the same exact member. So I actually know that these members are already good. So that's actually all you have to do for the calculations for the exterior beam. How many members are there? You got to count them up, etc., etc. Now we're ready for the exterior girder. The exterior girder. So the exterior girder is over here, and we have to figure out how the girder is loaded. And we said before that we're going to ignore the beams right here and right here because they're tying into the column. So the way that this girder is loaded is you have the two beams right here acting on it as point loads. So we're going to go over to this calculator over here, and these P's right here are the reactionary forces from the beams acting upon it. So the beam length, 20. Remember, beam and girder are the same thing. We just call them something different for distinction purposes, but like they're all I-beams. Distance from the load, I guess that's going to be the 6.67. And it's asking me what is my dead load and what is my live load. And we go back to our chart over here. I'm going to go back to when we were in exterior. Or an interior, I mean. It doesn't actually tell us what the reactionary forces are that are dead live. It does tell us reactionary forces, so these values over here are what we need. But it doesn't tell us what the breakdown is of how much of this 4.8 is dead and how much of this is live. However, we can figure that out by looking at the proportions. So this one happens to be exactly half and half. So the dead is 2.4 kips and the live is 2.4 kips. But should this have been broken down differently, say it was 30 and 60, then the total is 90 PSF, and dead would be 1/3 of that. So for R of A, if I wanted to get what portion of the 5.4 kips is dead and what's live, I would do 5.4 times 1/3 for dead, and 5.4 times 2/3 for live. You do a proportion. And if it's something kind of random, like, I don't know, something that you couldn't do just mentally, you would do 3.2 times 16 divided by these two numbers added together. Before I forget, let's go back to what we originally had. But this one's easy. It's half and half, so it's going to be 2.4 for each of them. So we're going over here, 2.4 and 2.4. Divide by 0, well, that's just because you haven't plugged in your value over here yet. Okay, so now we need a z of x of 17.8 or greater. So W10 by 17 works. W12 by 16 is even stronger and even lighter. And then the lightest W14 is heavier, so I'm going to go with a W12 by 16. And what was it, 20.1 and 103. And then we have to get the values over here, so 12 by 16. 0.22 and 1199. Alright, done with that one. Now we are ready for the interior girder. The interior girder right here. So what's the difference between exterior girder and an interior girder? Well, the interior girder has 2 beams tying in at each point, whereas the exterior girder only had 1 beam tying in. So I'm hoping you're recognizing that the interior girders are seeing double the amount as the exteriors. So instead of 2.4 right here, I'm going to do 4.8 for each, because it's 2 beams tying in. So you're going to add them together or multiply by 2. Okay, don't forget we have to change it when you don't have to change, so before we forget, let's get rid of these values. And now we need a higher z of x of 35.6 or greater. What was it? 35.6. 12 by 26. W14 by 26 also works, and it's same weight and it's taller, so it's stronger. So W14 by 26. So W14 by 26 is 40.2 and 245. Is that right or no? Okay. $14 by 26. 1391.255. Great. And now we are done with our interior girder. So the last question was just, hey, how much steel are you buying? How much pounds of steel? And this is a standard spreadsheet that you have to create where you have the linear length of the member. So if the beam is 18 feet, you're going to put 18 right here. The pounds per linear foot, that's a second number. So if it's a 10 by 12 beam, the 10 doesn't really help me right here, but the 12 does. For every 1 foot, it's 12 pounds. And then the next question is how many there are. So I think there were like 15 for the interior beams, for example. So it would be 18 times 12 times 15 would give you how many pounds of steel you're ordering for the interior beam. You do the same for the other 3. You multiply across, and then you add going down to get the total amount of pounds. Do a very quick Google search for cost per pound of steel. You can literally type that in Google and get a value, and then you multiply those 2 values together, and then you can get the total amount of steel that you need. And that concludes this video.